So I was going to take Christmas Day off, but I had a little more time on my hands than I expected, so I thought I would slap something together as a Christmas present, because that's the kind of guy I am, always thinking of other people. Now, if you're expecting some kind of deep analysis of an issue, then you'll be disappointed. This is Christmas Day after all. But I thought I would present to you my favourite Marxist, Brendan O'Neill. And if all Marxists was pro-free speech as Brendan, we'd probably be more favourably disposed towards them. But unfortunately these days, Brendan's an outlier. Enjoy.
Brendan O'Neill, you wrote that you want Section 18C torn up because you, and I quote, trust Australians to use their unshackled reason to separate the good ideas from the wicked ones. Growing up as a person of colour in Australia, I know that racial abuse is not an uncommon experience. In fact, despite being a respected pharmacist in his community for 16 years, my father is racially vilified on a regular basis. Do you think the removal or changes to 18C that may give people more social licence to racially discriminate is appropriate?
Brendan, start with you.
I think Section 18C is a disgrace. I think it's a black mark against the good name of Australia, simply for the very basic reason that it invites the state to police thought and speech. And it is, in my view, it is never the role of the state to police thought and speech. And if you just look at, for example, recent cases like the Andrew Bolt case or the QUT case, where students are currently being threatened with punishment for expressing disagreement with the idea of having segregated laboratories for Indigenous students, what you have is a situation in Australia in the 21st century where people are being punished for expressing an opinion. And to my mind, that brings to my mind the Soviet Union, the Orwellian idea of a society in which you can be punished for thinking certain things and for saying certain things. I simply think it's unacceptable, it's never acceptable, to invite the government to police the realm of thought and speech. Of course, the government must police the realm of action and behaviour, and if you push someone or punch someone or murder someone, you will be punished. But if you express an opinion, you should never, ever be punished for that.
Let me just put this to you. You've written that you actually like it when you hear hateful speech because it reminds you you're in a free society. That's going a bit far, isn't it?
No, I love hearing hate speech for two reasons. Firstly, because it reminds me I live in a free society. And secondly, because it allows me, as someone who has been an anti-racist campaigner since I was 18 years old, to challenge those ideas. This is the real problem with Section 18C. It actually disempowers anti-racists by denying us, robbing us of the right to see racism, to know it, to understand it, and to confront it in public. Instead, it entrusts the authorities to hide that racism away on our behalf, which means that we never have a reckoning with it. I'm opposed to anti-racist censorship precisely because I am anti-racist, and I want the opportunity to know where these people are, know what they think, and challenge them in the public realm.
I'm just going to go back to our questioner, Annabeth. You look a little sceptical. What do you make of that argument, that he's anti-racist but free speech is too important to fool with? Well,
firstly, I think that, since the new part of 18C, which talks about, offending people and intimidating people, came in around, I think it was 1995, and to, encourage social cohesion in this multicultural society that we live in and, free people from mental harm from being racially vilified. And according to the Human Rights Commission, the way these cases are solved are actually come about in a more educational way. So if someone, for instance, I think there was an example where, they said at a caravan park, no Aboriginals will be, taken in here at all. And the way that was solved is usually on a mutual agreement and people talk it out and there's, a small fine to be paid, but there's an interaction and a conversation about it anyway, and it allows people to, use that legal means to get compensation for that sort of thing. So
just a brief response, because I want to hear from the other panellists, but you can just respond to that quickly.
Well, I think obviously discrimination is a different matter. If you are actively discriminating against someone and preventing them from accessing public services, that's a different question. But I think it's very important that when it comes to expressing opinion, even if it's ugly opinion, We have to protect people's right to do that, because otherwise you'll end up in a situation where the state has the right to decide what's a good opinion and what's a bad opinion. And no one, least of all minority groups, should support that. We must remember that every marginalised group in history has seen free speech as their greatest friend, because it's the means through which they can express themselves, through which they can argue against their oppression, through which they can challenge the authorities. So we have to defend the right of free speech for everyone.
Well, here's what freaks me out about gay marriage. It presents itself as this kind of liberal, civil rights-y issue, but it has this really ugly, intolerant streak to it. Anyone who opposes gay marriage is demonised, harassed. We've seen people thrown out of their jobs because they criticise gay marriage. We've seen people ejected from polite society. You know, 200 years ago, if you didn't believe in God, you wouldn't have a hope in hell of getting ahead in public life. Today, if you don't believe in gay marriage, you don't have a hope in hell of getting ahead in public life. There's a real ugly element to this. And I think, you know, you really see it with the whole cake shop phenomenon. This whole thing around the Western world where people are going to Christian traditional cake shops and saying to them, hey, you stupid Christians, make this cake for me. And if they don't, they call the police. There are equality cases. Shops have closed down. It's like a 21st century form of religious persecution. It's horrendous. And I think, you know, it's, of course, some people support gay marriage, as we've heard. That's absolutely fine. But what's extraordinary and unacceptable is that they cannot tolerate the existence of people who do not support gay marriage. And I think we sometimes fail to understand how extraordinary that is. And I think the reason Tony Abbott is very defensive on this issue and is erming and ahhing and shifting from the free vote to the not free vote and all this stuff, he clearly has a problem with gay marriage, but he can't articulate it because we live in a climate in which it's not acceptable, as we've just seen in Sam's attack on Katie, calling her hateful and saying she's talking claptrap. It's not acceptable to express this sentiment in public life.
Hang on,
and I think so Tony Abbott is now being described as someone from the Dark Ages for believing what humanity has believed for thousands of years. Within the space of a decade, something that humanity believed for thousands of years has suddenly become a form of bigotry, a form of hate, something you're not allowed to express in public life. That extraordinary shift in intolerance is something I think all liberals, like me, should be worried about. Gay marriage is not a liberal issue. It has a deeply illiberal streak.
There's been some talk recently about targets for female politicians, particularly in the Liberal Party. But what's next? You'll have targets for black people, targets for gay people, targets for disabled people. I don't think we need to label people like that. What happened to just picking people based on merit alone, rather than on gender or race or anything like that?
Start with Brendan O'Neill, who's written about this.
Yeah, I think targets or quotas or anything for women in politics is a terrible idea because those women will never know for sure whether they were selected on the basis of merit or on the basis of their biology. And I think, you know, when you hear people like Kelly saying earlier this week or last week, I think, you know, women need help in Parliament to have the confidence to raise their hand and ask a question. It's like you're talking about school children. These are adults. These are autonomous adults who have... It's in your ABC interview. These are autonomous adults. They have freedom. They have autonomy. And the problem is that women are being infantilized by this process. So much of modern feminism actually infantilises women by treating them as incapable of negotiating public life on their own without the assistance of the government or targets and so on. And the thing I find really obnoxious about this discussion is the idea that women make politics more consensual and more conciliatory and more friendly. And what you have is the rehabilitation of the old prejudice that this is the fairer sex, that they're mothering, that they're caring. My political heroines were not consensual. Bernadette Devlin, the MP for Mid-Ulster in the 1970s, who strode across the House of Commons and punched the Home Secretary in the face when he lied about Bloody Sunday. She wasn't consensual. This idea that women are more consensual than men, more caring, more motherly, is actually, in a PC form, it rehabilitates an old prejudice. I think we need to let women go, let them run on their own, and they will make it on their own.
Okay,
they're not
right.
children, they are adults.
Okay.